Why don't you go ahead and tell him what we're here to talk about?
I think you're going to like what we're here to talk about.
Why'd you lay it on him?
All right, I'll lay it on him. Sequel. Interesting.
PJ, I love what you did with the very first 3 Lord of the Rings.
Thanks.
I love the kooky creatures. I love the goblins. I love the gnomes.
Giant elephants, my favorite.
I think there's still milk in the Lord of the Rings teats. What I'm inviting you to do today is suck it with me. Oh my goodness, did you taste that? There was another drop of milk.
I'm still sucking.
Guys,
Hold on a second. There's a little more in there.
Baby wants some milk, please.
Guys.
Nerdrotic.com.
Now that Kenobi's over and we're still a few days out from Thor Love and Blunder, we have a little respite in between fan attacks, but the big one is still to come. We have 2 months until the Rings of Prime, and yet we haven't seen a single trailer. We've seen a couple of teasers, but nothing with any actual dialogue in it. I am certainly getting some Eternal vibes, but I want to start this video out by stating that I was wrong. Unlike my prediction of Warrior Galadriel, which was 100% right, I said she would be leading an all-female army of Númenóreans, and it turns out it's only going to be 50%. Now, it was back on October 12th, 2020, I released a video called They Are Coming for Lord of the Rings, and it was all based on a OneRing.net article, which I mostly agreed with. How times have changed. But that video specifically was a warning. This is the thing I wanted to avoid in the Lord of the Rings fandom. I didn't want to see what happened to Star Wars happen to Lord of the Rings. I didn't want to see what happened to Doctor Who and Star Trek and Marvel Comics and everything else we've loved happen to Lord of the Rings. The good news is, things are different this time around. Finally, there's a fan base that is largely united in one sole purpose: protecting the legacy, protecting the lore of the great Professor Tolkien. The fact of the matter is, and no, this is not a rumor, this is not speculation, this is not conjecture, Amazon is in panic mode, and the undeniable evidence is in their actions, which we will get to. But first, in reference to that video I released almost 2 years ago, who are the they, using my proper pronouns, in the They Are Coming for Lord of the Rings? This time we're going to go to a little podcast called The Fanbase Podcast, who has guests like writers from sites like IGN, IO9, and the Mary Sue, and they decided to tackle the subject of female orcs, and I'll let them expose themselves in their own words. Honestly, we don't need to listen to the podcast. It says it all right there in the thumbnail, but there is more.
Our first story this week comes from the Mary Sue, which takes us to the land of Twitter, where the shadows lie. Amazon released several new photos for its upcoming Lord of the Rings prequel series, The Rings of Power, and one in particular has stirred up some controversy. A picture of a female orc is apparently too much for Twitter trolls, who cannot seem to grasp that Melkor could have corrupted female elves as well. Rather than listen to the internet speculate on this issue, we can go straight to the source to get a definitive answer. In a letter to a fan, Tolkien himself said, quote, "There must have been orc women, but in stories that seldom, if ever, see the orcs except as soldiers of armies in the service of the evil lords, we naturally would not learn much about their lives. Not much was known," end quote. So it looks like the trolls have argued too long and dawn is breaking. Well, this debate is pretty well settled. It does bring up the bigger issue of gatekeeping. So, panel, why do you think gatekeeping is so prevalent in nerd culture and particularly aggressive in franchises whose message is one of inclusion and progress?
On the subject of gatekeeping, and my good friend Az from Heel vs. Babyface pointed this out, we can't gatekeep anyone. We don't own any streaming services. We don't own these franchises. We have no power. Now, maybe you in the Access Media feel your power slipping because you haven't been honest with your paying customers, and that is your problem. The only gatekeeping going on is Amazon gatekeeping Tolkien. For example, reimagining or completely vandalizing established characters like Galadriel or leaving them out altogether to make room for original characters. Speaking of which, we do have an update on our missing elf Kelleborne, and this is quite a big change from the books, and this is going to be a spoiler for the Rings of Power Season 1. Kelleborne, Galadriel's husband, is dead. Considering Kelleborne is Arwen's grandpappy, they have to bring him back, don't they? I may regret saying this, but I don't even think these hack showrunners would go that far, but if and when they do bring him back, it'll be in the most predictable way possible. And speaking of predictable, of course he couldn't be in season 1. They wouldn't want Galadriel robbed of any of her agency and saddled down by a heteronormative relationship. But don't worry, that gets balanced out by warrior Galadriel going into battle with the Queen Regent of Numenor to go slay some orcs and rack up a Conan body count. We'll get to The Lord of the Rings being a story of inclusion and progress a little later on. But first, as always, it starts with the straw man.
Claire?
You know, I follow a number of Lord of the Rings experts on TikTok because it's just delightful to hear them over and over and over and over again address these same questions. So,
she went to TikTok to listen to the experts.
Yeah, it's just so strange to me to limit things that way. It just I don't quite understand.
I would argue that subverting somebody's work is indeed limiting it. When you can adapt it for what it is while still making the necessary changes like Peter Jackson so it has the most appeal. But that's not the problem here. The problem with the posers, the problem with the activists is it has to reflect their exact point of view. My point of view is just keep it as Tolkien as possible. Their point of view is change Tolkien as much as possible to fit the world of today, which is actually the world of 2019.
And anyone trying to limit Tolkien's world in the first place, that's so antithetical to like just the existence of Tolkien and what he loved doing.
He was extremely stubborn and obstinate, and he wrote it the way he wanted to.
You did not go around editing Tolkien. That would have been the absolute final sin. After all, he was a professor of English language and literature and knew what he was writing.
You know, in creating this world, it was about, you know, filling in all of these details. And I think I appreciate, you know, whether they're successful or not, I think I appreciate, you know, any attempts at bringing us and bits of that world and fleshing it out more. It's the truest thing that I think fans can do to honor Tolkien's approach to, you know, art and creativity. It's just mind-boggling to me why it matters so much.
I should just let this thing run and not say anything. It's mind-boggling to a podcast called The Fan Base why people care so much. And it's perfectly okay to expand on Tolkien's work with Tolkien's work and not with Amazon's.
I did see as well, I think in that article, wasn't there another picture someone posted in a Twitter response where they're basically just posting orcs from probably the Battle of Pelennor Fields, right? Like, yeah. You know, like going, oh, well, tell me this isn't a girl. I mean, come on, look at that face.
Hate to break this to you. Actually, I don't. In the ultimate self-own, the Mary Sue did indeed print this as a female orc, and there is no way around it. I'm not too sure if the guy posting it on Twitter was having a good laugh or not. Meanwhile, some watchful fans are pointing out that Orchitha, my dear princess of the night, was not actually the first of her kind on the big screen. There were others paving the way before her, and they decided to put into print Goritz, who I have an action figure of by Osmus and is also played by a dude named Joel Tobic.
Tell me this isn't a girl. I mean, come on, look at that face.
Which the Mary Sue's Madeline Carpoo or anyone on this podcast could have figured out with this simple Google search. Just a moment. Need a little sip of the Geek Grind Nerdrotic blend. Delicious. Maybe this was the picture you were looking for to own the trolls, except the trolls you're referring to are actual Tolkien fans who know that women played orcs in Peter Jackson's trilogy and know that there are female orcs. I'll use the quote that you used.
Rather than listen to the internet speculate on this issue, we can go straight to the source to get a definitive answer in a letter to a fan Tolkien himself said, quote, "There must have been orc women, but in stories that seldom, if ever, see the orcs except as soldiers of armies in the service of the evil lords, we naturally would not learn much about their lives. Not much was known," end quote. So it looks like the trolls have argued too long and dawn is breaking.
Or maybe you could have done what I did, read the book.
But now Frodo often met strange dwarves of far countries seeking refuge in the west. They were troubled, and some spoke in whispers of the enemy and of the land of Mordor. The Dark Tower had been rebuilt, it was said. From there the power was spreading far and wide, and away far east and south there were wars and growing fears. Orcs were multiplying again in the mountains.
Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear that the orcs are multiplying in the mountains, and I would just love to see Amazon put that to screen, I'm guessing that a male orc gets busy with a female orc, although I'm not an orc biologist, and then she spits out a litter of orcs.
Or just, I think even the idea that orcs could be like a non-binary, why is anybody spending a whole lot of time thinking about orcs in terms of gender norms? Really?
What? What the fuck?
My guess would be the 0.04% of people who actually care about gender norms, and the 0.04% of that 0.04% who care about gender norms in Lord of the Rings, who largely live their lives on TikTok and Twitter, discuss it amongst themselves and their 18 roommates and 19 cats, and the rest of us don't give a shit. But we'll just cut to the chase on this one because it's hard to keep up with somebody who just complained about obsessing on gender norms when they were just obsessing on gender norms. They're the ones who brought up female orcs and cited a Mary Sue article, which really doesn't show any receipts of anybody being pissed off about anything. What we were really doing was trolling Amazon, bragging about female orcs. Here's my tweet. Finally, female orcs. Sexism is conquered by Amazon. Now women can see themselves in something that is pure evil. Progress.
Yeah, I always thought they were agender.
Yeah.
The mention of, I guess, their gender in the book was so long ago in my reading history when the movies came out. I just assumed they were agender. They were being created. So I was like, oh.
Sure. And this is a world where, female dwarves, don't look that much unlike, male dwarves. It's not, the gender norms are not what other people would, what we tend to put in our, as important in our society. So I don't quite get it.
No, it doesn't sound like you quite get much. And I'm going to refer back to that article that I was covering, and they are coming for Lord of the Rings, where the OneRing.net did point out that Tolkien was super duper Catholic. And I know that doesn't matter to the casuals, the posers, the tourists, or the activists that work at the Mary Sue or may not be on the Fan Base podcast, because I don't really know and I don't really care. It's not up to them. It's not up to me. I'm not Catholic, but I want them to respect Tolkien's messages, Tolkien's beliefs, and that is not happening. Somehow, most of us can set aside our own personal spiritual and ideological beliefs to enjoy a simple story. For example, I have a disdain for centralized government, yet I can still enjoy a story written by a devout Catholic set in a feudalistic fantasy world that's supposed to be a mythology for a country I don't live in.
Ariel, do you have any more to add on that?
Yeah, from a psychology standpoint, the gatekeeping as a form of communication is really just how we filter information in order to not be overwhelmed by the information around us. So when something really rocks our belief system, our norm, or what we kind of hold sacred and true, our immediate reaction is to reject it. Our immediate reaction is to sort of like double down on what we think is correct, even if we're being given all the facts that our thinking is wrong. And essentially that's just very human. We like to feel right. We like to believe we're right. Nobody ever wants to admit that they're wrong. It takes a different level of emotional intelligence to not see wrongness as part of your humanness and to not see it as a marker for being not worthy or undervalued.
Far be it from me to disagree with somebody who wants to bring psychology into gatekeeping as a communication device to filter information because we're scared of change. No, I'm not that insecure, and I don't think anybody else is, but I think it's a good time to cue Peter Jackson once again.
We didn't want to put any of our own baggage. I mean, we had no interest in putting our messages into this movie, but we thought that we should honor Tolkien by putting his messages into it.
So when something really rocks our belief system, our norm, or what we kind of hold sacred and true, our immediate reaction is to reject it. Our immediate reaction is to sort of like double down on what we think is correct, even if we're being given all the facts that our thinking is wrong. And essentially that's just very human. We like to feel right. We like to believe we're right. Nobody ever wants to admit that they're wrong. It takes a different level of emotional intelligence to not see wrongness as part of your humanness and to not see it as a marker for being not worthy or undervalued. And so it's common that it's happening. I think when you're looking at the socialization of how we socialize, at least here in the West, particularly men and boys, we socialize them to see their presentation of strength, both in their physical and their knowledge base. So when you present them with something that says that you could be wrong, that also means that somehow for you, you're thinking that means you're inferior or less than. And so you want to try and reclaim your sense of strength and your sense of personhood. You want to reclaim the fact that you're quote unquote a man, or in this case, a real fan.
Down with the patriarchy. That's the message.
I think Peter Jackson said it best by describing it as baggage. Why do you need your baggage in J.R.R. Tolkien's story? That's the question. There's another one. What would it take for you to admit you were wrong? Would it be the teaser trailer getting ratioed, or the Superfan video getting ratioed, or the Amazon Prime UK trailer getting ratioed, or the Amazon Prime trailer getting ratioed to the tune of 1.7 million dislikes? And yes, it is an algorithm that tends to estimate low. Would it be the latest commercial that got ratioed? Nope, I'm guessing you're going to believe it's bots or some kind of Russian conspiracy, because it would rock your belief system to know that men and women came together in one fan base to say no.
And so you're going to double down on what your belief system is. And if you have other people around you championing you and agreeing with you, why would you think that you were wrong?
Then the co-host agrees with her.
I think that was a very great observation. I could not put words to it in that way. But I think from my point of view, you know, I said I was a lifelong geek, and I do feel like it's sort of like, you know, when I was a kid, you know, liking fantasy, liking comic books, toys, it was stuff that you had to give up, you know, at about adolescence, you know, or it was something you had to hide, you know. And so I kind of feel like that now the nerds are dominating the world and have learned all the wrong lessons and have become the bullies in many ways.
Always accuse your quote unquote opponent of what you are actually doing. I could not agree more. The nerd that is obsessed with identity politics, or the activist nerd, have certainly thrown around terms like racism and white supremacists because some of us don't like a particular film or TV show.
Even if Tolkien had a foundational scripted thing that was like they are only male or agender or whatever they wanted it to be.
Well, he actually does. It's called The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, The Unfinished Tales. I could go on.
I like adaptations that can be flexible with the source material. I know that's terrible to hear for some people, but I think there are certain things, especially older works, where we benefit by updating them with our current understanding.
I think to apply modern political thinking on a story that is essentially 50 years old is a little bit inappropriate. It's the one and only Digo Double G.
Well, there you have it. We benefit by updating Professor Tolkien's work with our current understanding. In other words, hijacking another beloved franchise to turn it into somebody's personal ideological platform. And to address specifically The Lord of the Rings being a franchise of progress and inclusion, what the hell are you smoking? It's a traditional story of good and evil. Everything Hollywood hates and can't wait to subvert with cynicism, nihilism, and postmodernism. This podcast probably has identical beliefs to practically everybody working currently on Amazon's Lord of the Rings as they double down on their belief systems, turning a beloved story into a message. If you like what you heard, please like, share, and subscribe. If you didn't like what you heard, I thank you for listening this long. I will see you in the next video.
Nerdrotic.com.
Cast it into the fire! Destroy it!